Hello, so today we're going to talk about all of the 5 costs and 7 costs in the game, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you can itemize them in the game. This is for set 16, right now it's PBE, but the set is actually going to launch in 3 days, so think of this as like an early look, not necessarily optimal items for everybody, but just an idea of how you can kind of play around and itemize the units based on the information that we have currently in PBE. For those of you that like my content, please make sure to like and subscribe. I did a version of this for 4 costs a couple of days ago, but I do daily TFT guides. Of course, when the set actually launches and we have the final balance and final adjustments to all of the units, there's going to be much more focus and much more precise guides that I'm going to be putting out basically every single day to keep you guys updated with set 16. So make sure to like and subscribe early if you want to stay tuned. But anyways, I'm going to break them down into 3 separate sections. So first, it's going to be all of the 5 costs that are just in the game already that you can just play. It's going to be all of the 5 costs that are unlockables, and I'll talk a little bit about their unlocks as well. And then there's going to be the 7 costs, which are a little bit more expensive. They're supposed to be a little bit more juicy, or these high cap potentials, and we'll talk a little bit about those if you're trying to aim towards that. But anyways, let's first start with all of the 5 costs in the game. First of all, Annie. So Annie, she's a little bit unique. So basically when you summon her, when you put her on your board, you can also pair her with Tibbers, which is another unit. Tibbers will basically act, like I said, as another unit, taking up a unit slot, and will also add to the Arcanist trait. It will count as 2 Arcanists because Tibbers himself will contribute to that as well. So when we're talking about itemizing, a lot of times if you're playing Annie, you're usually playing with both of these units because they work really well hand in hand. Annie has a little bit of a weirdness to the way that her kit works. She basically has this huge mana threshold of 170, and basically after the first cast, she basically applies burning and wounding, which is basically anti-heal to the entire board, and does an insane amount of dot damage that just lasts a huge amount of time. After that, her mana gets dropped all the way down to 20, so it gets reduced by 150, and then she just becomes like a single target DPS, just shooting for damage in that regard. Overall, the main thing that you want with Annie is to get through that first cast, because that is the most important part, just applying the anti-heal, starting the clock ticking of like this damage over time effect that she has, and then afterwards she's just gonna like chain cast and just try and melt through people. Tibbers also basically has a passive that basically heals and he just lives forever if enemies are burning, so it kind of works hand in hand. If you get that first cast off, then Tibbers is just gonna live for a really long time. When you think about Annie, for that reason, double mana generation is typically what you end up with on her, and a lot of times if you're playing her more of a support role, just like on there, you can actually go for triple tier based items. So what I mean by that, if you're trying to like play her, a lot of times it's something like Shojin, or maybe even double Shojin, or it's Shojin and an adaptive helm, or it's double adaptive helm, or it's double Nashers. It's basically anything that gives you mana generation is going to be important, and you want 2 of those because you need to get through that first cast as soon as possible. So 1 mana gen typically isn't going to be good enough. She's going to hit not like it's just going to be not good. So you want to have 2 mana gen. This is like, you know, if you're going for more damage, you go Nashers, JG, and this is more of like a carry Annie, but you need 2 mana generation. That's typically what ends up happening just to get through that first cast initially. So a lot of times you're going to use whatever you can. It might end up being something like this. And then last item, you can even go for a 3rd tier item if she's more of a support on your board and you're just slotting her in, and you can give her a Void Staff because she'll hit the whole board with it, and then do the apply the shred effect to everybody. Or you can go for like a JG or some way of scaling her AP that she already has. Tibbers scales well with HP and AP, so if you can put HP items on him, that would be great. But also you can put like any tank items, and you actually run him as a primary tank if you're playing towards like an Arcanist board or anything like that. But the main thing with Annie that I want to stress is the double mana generation. Sorry, it doesn't let me put it on him, but you can actually itemize the Tibbers as well. So double mana, I don't know which exactly is the perfect ones for her, because it will come down to some math of exactly how to efficiently get to 170, but whatever you can do, just double mana or double coherent mana, like, you know, if you have Nashers, you need some crit pairing with that, and that'll work out pretty well. Azir, so Azir basically summons these extra sand soldiers. Azir himself, I find, doesn't necessarily do that much damage. I find that Azir is not necessarily a good carry right now. And a lot of times, like, if you're trying to fit in the role of like a disruptor on your board, you're typically going for other disruptors that are much more efficient at dealing damage. But with Azir, he basically scales with attack speed really well. So if you are itemizing towards the Azir, which, like I said, I wouldn't necessarily recommend. It's more so he more as like a support role. You unlock Shurima, play the other Shurima units, have like a huge amount of extra front line because you have these extra sand soldiers. But basically, you want the attack speed. So something like a Guinsoo or other bow items are going to be good. And then you can build him with other AP items because he does mostly AP damage. So it's usually, instead of mana gen, you're going for attack speed and then some sort of build, either a crit build or a damage amp build or something like this. Jewel Gauntlet with the strikers that basically gives you a bunch of damage amp from strikers, and then pair that with the crit and just optimize your damage that way. Or you can just put utility on him, but usually like the main thing that you want is some sort of bow related items. Now, Kindred. Kindred actually can be a really reliable carry. Kindred is a little bit outshone by the other AD unit, so there's not many AD units on level 9 or like traditional backline AD units, but that's fine. Like I think like in general with some of the unlocks, there's a little bit more of a focus on AP with some of them. But with Kindred, Kindred scales well with attack speed. She does an insane amount of damage, but Kindred also has this thing where she keeps your units alive by basically like making this little zone, and then like they can't die. So it can be a really big nuisance and actually be really powerful. Because Kindred has Quick Striker, you may or may not actually need the Guinsoo on the Kindred, but you know, currently right now Guinsoo looks like it's pretty good. And then a lot of times you're going for like a Guinsoo Kraken style of build or attack speed Kraken, because Kindred is mostly an AD unit, even though there's some AP scaling. So with the AD, you just want to do something like attack speed, scale it up to get the base AD really high with Kraken. Kraken's a little bit nerfed, so you might have some other options there, and then you can pair that with either crit or damage amp. Something like Giant Slayer is just a really good item in general, ever since it got buffed in set 15. So Giant Slayer works really well because you also get some extra AP and AD, which can help you with like the extra healing that Kindred can do. But of course, if the fights are going really fast, Guinsoo might not have time to ramp up. You might just end up going for another bow item here and allow the Kindred to kind of like pop off in that way. Next, we have Lucian and Senna. So here I'm actually going to use another site. It does have some extra information, so don't get too overwhelmed. But we're just going to look at the left side of the screen. Lucian and Senna basically alternates between Lucian and Senna. So when there is Lucian out, you'll basically do this ability where you fire, scaling off attack speed, these shots, and you just do like a huge amount of damage, just like firing the two guns. And then obviously when you go to Senna, you'll do like this massive burst. It'll shoot like the furthest target, so it'll usually go full screen. And then it also provides a shield effect. Additionally, with these two units, they also have the synergy, where is it? Soulbound, right? Where if Lucian or Senna is out, it will give your team damage reduction or damage amp. In general, Lucian and Senna, one of the best 5 costs to slot in on any board, because you just plop them on. You don't even need to worry about their synergies. They have Gunslinger, which means you can give them extra AD by playing other Gunslingers. Of course, that's what that does. But in general, you don't care about that. You just plop this unit on your board. You are getting, when Senna is out, a shield. You are getting durability, you are getting damage amp, you are getting so much value for a single unit, and you have a unit that hits the entire board. So depending on what you're doing, a lot of times you can just slot in a Lucian Senna, and then you can just give them like the utility items, right? Give them anti-heal, give them sunder, give them shred, give them whatever your board needs, because they're gonna hit pretty much everybody or most of the board, and they're just gonna do a great job of doing so. An amazing support unit in their own right. Currently, I don't know if this is going to make it to live, but Lucian and Senna is also broken. They're actually really strong. Like, they're absurdly strong. So you can actually play them as a primary carry, actually, and a lot of Fast 9 boards will actually revolve around playing Lucian Senna if you have AD items over like the Kindred or the other thing. Now, Lucian scales off attack speed, so you might think that you want to put something like a Guinsoo or something like that. In general, the scaling on the Lucian isn't that good, because like when he switches to Senna, like the Senna doesn't scale off the attack speed as well. So a lot of times you just care about getting the casts off more so than getting like the attack speed up. So a lot of times like you actually build them with a Shojin, and you can go like Shojin IE and go for like a crit build, right? You can go crit, damage amp. Giant Slayer is really good and really efficient. If you want, you can also go for strikers for more consistency on the crit. And you can actually build Lucian Senna as like a primary damage dealer. You can also do a little bit of a mixture, right? If you're going for a crit build, you can also put the Last Whisper, so you have the crit glove pairing, and it gives a little bit of attack speed to help the Lucian a little bit. But in general, the Lucian attack speed scaling, even though it's there, currently you don't often play around it. You more so just build them like a caster, because you care more about getting the Lucian out than getting the Senna cast. And the Senna drops like a huge nuke. Like when she drops the beam, she targets the furthest enemy, so sometimes she even snipes the back line. So it actually works really well as opposed to just like the attack speed. But either one is fine, and even if you don't have mana gen and you do have attack speed, you can still put attack speed on them because the Lucian does scale off of it. So really flexible with the items there as well. Next, we'll go through Zilean. We'll do Fiddlesticks last. We'll just kind of go in this order. Zilean kind of sometimes does a lot of damage and sometimes doesn't. So I've actually experimented a lot with Zilean. I think he got a little bit nerfed, but basically with Zilean is Chrono Keeper Invoker. Chrono Keeper, a lot of times when you're playing Zilean, is to try and get to level 10. At level 10, he gains extra damage amp, but basically every 2 casts, he stores XP, which makes it easier to level. Basically, if you level, you can stop, and then the Zilean will take over if he has enough XP to get you to the next level. So Zilean's great if you hit him early. Invoker is great because as a 2 trait, you can just give mana gen to your entire board, but there's a lot of like Freljord, Lissandra boards that cap really high with Zilean right now. There's a lot of like 4 Invoker style boards that can also work out well. Invoker also scales with extra mana gen, because the way Invoker works is you gain more mana from all sources. So typically with Zilean, what you end up doing is playing around similar to Annie, double mana gen, but this time for different reasons, right? Because you get a lot of value off Invoker, the double mana gen works really well to just allow him to kind of pop off. So similarly, you know, same with Annie, depending on what your tier items are, you can go double Adaptive Helm, double Shojin, Nashers with JG, stuff like that. All of them are fine. The other thing is that Zilean also hits a lot of different units, so you can also even go for utility on him. One thing that's really crazy about Zilean is his secondary effect, right? So basically with Zilean, when you upgrade him or when you play him, he has this time bomb, right, that he marks enemies with. Right, so in addition to the regular damage that he does, if the time bomb is on a unit for a certain amount of time, he will execute the enemy, no matter how much HP they have. So there's actually, what I was experimenting a lot with was like particular chain cast builds. These aren't good right now, by the way. They looked good earlier on in PBE, and as the set kind of evolved and people continue to play the game, they're starting to look like not as good. But I used to do something like Gwinsu Shojin, where you just like try and chain cast, get the attack speed up and generate mana, and then just like play like a 5 Warden front line, or play like an insane front line, and just have the Zilean get his cast off on anybody, and then after like 16 seconds just kill like half the board, and like, you know, something like that. That's something you can look out for. Maybe it will happen on live, but typically right now, if you're playing Zilean as a main carry, a lot of times it's double mana and then something like a damage amp item, or because he gets damage amp if you're level 10, something like a JG, and you just go for the damage. And then of course, if units live long enough and you get the marks on the right unit, then you'll get the execute anyways in those later situations. Next we have Ornn. So Ornn is mostly a frontline unit. So Ornn has a chill effect, he does magic damage, but Ornn isn't really like a primary damage dealer. What you're usually playing Ornn for is his blacksmith. Basically this trait gives you an Ornn artifact after 4 turns. These artifacts, basically, when Ornn is on the board, will give extra HP to anybody that's holding them. Anybody that's holding the, excuse me. When he has an Ornn artifact, the artifacts will give him extra HP, and he also gains extra HP for every item. So in general, he's just like a really big HP tank. You can put the Ornn artifacts on everybody else, but you get a lot of value for putting them on Ornn himself, especially if they're a tank related artifact. So a lot of times when you're playing Ornn, you usually end up putting like the tank Ornn artifacts on him just to make him really strong. And there are quite a few of them, but even regular like random Ornn artifacts are going to give him a lot of HP as like just to help him out, right? So basically this Ornn a lot of times becomes like this unkillable, really tanky monster with a huge amount of HP, because you have the 5 cost just being like higher in stats, and then you also have the extra HP that you get either from artifacts or from just regular items equipped on him. But either way, if you're not building towards the Ornn artifacts on him, you can just build him like a normal tank, right? Your HP, your armors, your MRs, those are all going to work out fine, because he's going to gain a bunch of HP, and then you can just scale that. So a lot of times resists are really good, and can help you out quite a bit in that regard. Next we have Shyvana. So Shyvana is a melee style carry. That's the way you should think about her. Now, she transforms into giant dragon, she dive bombs in, she gets durability, she does physical AD, but then the other thing that's great about her is that she also gives your whole team durability. So Shyvana, similar to Senna and Lucian, is very common on 5-cost boards, because not only could you play Shyvana really nicely because she'll be a juggernaut, she'll be a really good tank, she'll do some damage, she does everything, right? But she also helps your entire team take less damage, right? All allies take 10% less damage from enemy abilities. Now, it's not like pure like damage reduction, right? Because abilities, whatever, like, you know what I mean? But it's still a team-wide benefit that you get with also a unit that is quite good and quite tanky in her own right. Now, because it's a melee unit that you want to kind of live long, gets a bunch of HP, usually what you're thinking about is like the pairing of like Bloodthirst or Sterex, right? Both these items give HP shields. They also work into like for like those melee drain tank style of carries. And additionally, like something like a Sterex works really well because it gives you AD, gives you HP, and you get this huge health shield. So it makes them really hard to kill, makes them really hard to just like, you know, deal with, and it just poses a giant problem. So a lot of times it's Omnivamp, Sterex, something like this. Last item, you can go for CC immunity. A lot of times Titans is really popular on this set, especially if you're a tank that dives in. The Titans is going to stack up really fast, so you're going to get a lot of extra attack damage and ability power. But you can also build Shyvana with some tank items, right? In place of these, if you're like stuck with the Thieves Gloves or something, it's a great outlet because she just works really nice on a lot of different boards. But you can also put like something that makes her a little bit tankier as well, or just more damage, because she also has the potential to do some good damage if you have her upgraded. Lastly, we have Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks, another great +1 on the unit. This is another one of those 5 costs that very often is going to be on your final board. Fiddlesticks just jumps in, does a huge amount of damage, basically just melts a bunch of units, really solid, but then also helps your team out quite a bit, right? Enemies lose 10 armor and magic resist when he jumps in, and also just poses a huge threat of just being a nuisance. Now, Fiddlesticks is kind of like a magic assassin, which means that he kind of just like, you know, jumps in, melee style unit, but deals with AP related items. Often when you see those types of things, we talked about with 4 costs, a lot of times it's like, you know, Hodge JG type of beat. If you have Vanquisher in, then his ult's gonna crit anyways. You don't need the Jewel Gauntlet, but you can just build towards crit items because it makes the crits more consistent. So when he jumps in and does all his damage, you'll have a greater chance of that actually being like an actual crit where it gives the damage scaling that it does. But with him as well, you can also build him for survivability and even mana gen, right? Because he also has like these weird properties with mana gen. Fiddlesticks, I find, is super flexible on the items. I find that you typically aren't playing towards Fiddlesticks as a primary carry, but you're basically just using him as an outlet of whatever leftover AP items you have, because you usually play him just for his bonus benefits of basically jumping in, being a nuisance, as well as like reducing armor and magic resist, which is just nice. He just provides a lot of team-wide benefit, does a large amount of damage no matter what the items are, and is just like really good at just like hitting AoE and kind of being a good addition to a high cap board. Because he hits so many units as well. You can also use him as an outlet for utility. Anti-heal and Shred Sunder obviously work really well because he's going to jump in and just apply that effect to everybody, which is really efficient and really powerful. But of course, if you're going more for like a damage style build where you're trying to carry him in a certain case, then I would go for like Hodge with other like crit style items or other mana gen style items, just because I think that's probably going to work out a little bit better in terms of just like scaling your damage in a meaningful way. Next, let's talk about all of the unlocks currently. So of the unlocks, we're going to go through first the 5 costs, and then we're going to talk about the 7 costs afterwards. So for the 5 costs, let's start with Aatrox. So Aatrox, Darken, gets Omnivamp, also has, where is it? World Ender, which allows him to scale off of Omnivamp. His unlock condition does require you to build basically 2 Omnivamp items in order to properly achieve it. So a lot of times you might end up just putting a bunch of Omnivamp on the Aatrox. I wouldn't say this is necessarily the best build for Aatrox because I think that it's a little bit awkward. I think he has enough Omnivamp in his kit, and the scaling to get from the Omnivamp into the AD from his World Ender is not necessarily enough to warrant you wasting a bunch of item slots on this. With Aatrox in particular, one build that has become really popular is actually just building a lot of attack speed. So something like a Guinsoo. With Aatrox, he usually can stack the Guinsoo very effectively because he has the revive effect that he gets with World Ender, where he will just like come back from the dead and just continue going. So it actually makes it really likely that you get to really high Guinsoo stacks, which actually makes him like really effective at just like using that to generate attack speed. But bow items and Guinsoo actually works really well just because of the way his ult works. His ult is kind of like a really low mana with like it's kind of like empowered auto attacks, right? So like he'll have very low mana and then he'll just hit like a big hit. So it actually scales really well with attack speed because he doesn't have like this huge cast timing. He doesn't like stop and wind up and, oh, let me stretch and like get my sword out. Like, no, it's just like very instant. And then especially when he gets his revive with World Ender, the mana is reduced for that. So when he gets his revive off, if you give him a bunch of attack speed, he just runs around and kills everything. Like, it's just like bang, 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 like hit after hit after hit. So it's becoming really popular to actually play like attack speed with them. And a lot of times you just give him like CC immunity and like more stats in the form of a Titans. So a lot of times it's like attack speed. If it's not Guinsoo, it's something else with bow related. And then something like this. Let me just find it. And Titans, right? Like Bloodthirster Titans, or you just drop this and you go like triple damage and just like hope that he has enough Omnivamp and damage to go with it. Of course, you could also build like a traditional melee fighter. I just wanted to really talk about the attack speed because it does look like it's pretty good, at least so far in PvE. But you can actually just build him like, you know, full crit kind of build, especially if you're using the Omnivamp items on him. Something like this, like pairing of crit gloves and then like some sort of survivability, right? Or damage amp. Something like this could also work. And then instead of the Guinsoo, you're just using the attack speed you get from a bow item to make up for it. Next we have the T-Hex. So T-Hex is actually a little bit weird. So I don't know if this is in the wrong section, by the way. I remember it being a 7 cost, but I might just be imagining things. But either way, T-Hex, no, actually no, it's a 5 cost. Sorry. The T-Hex basically is mostly an AD unit. It has scaling on HP, AD, AP, even attack speed. With the T-Hex, you have the Hexmex trait, which will basically give you some extra stats. Kind of like how Mech Pilot works in set 15. If you played set 15, you'll absorb a unit and gain the extra stats. So Tank, Fighter, Marksman, Caster, or Assassin will give you Omnivamp, attack damage, damage amp, mana gen, or crit chance. Because of this, you can actually change the way that you build the T-Hex. The T-Hex is mostly like a melee style frontline unit, so you can build them like kind of like a drain tank, especially since they scale well off HP and they're going to be like a big HP unit. You can give them stuff similar like how we were talking about with Shyvana, Bloodthirster, Sterix, and then +1. A lot of times it's actually Titans for CC immunity and some extra stats because there is AP and AD scaling on the T-Hex. So something like this is a very like strong, coherent, like easy build that you can put. But there's lots of different flexibility because based on who you absorb, you can actually change that, right? If you absorb a tank, you get a lot of Omnivamp, especially if it's 2-star T-Hex. So you can actually go for triple damage and then increase and get the Omnivamp through tank, right? By absorbing tank with your Hexmex. So in that case, what you end up doing is you go for something more like a crit build, right? Where you can actually go like QSS, like IE, where is it? Like IE Strikers. And you can just go for like a full crit build like this. But a lot of times, basically, you're filling in the gaps with the Hexmex. Right now, it's hard to know which one exactly works well. A lot of these types of builds perform really well because you just nuke the entire board and the TX is a little bit awkward in damage. Also, you get base AD from Gunslinger if you're able to activate it. So something like this with Gunslinger active, with absorbing an Omnivamp unit with Hexmex will work really well. Otherwise, if you go for a more traditional frontline kind of build, then you usually can go either crit or damage amp or attack damage in order to scale it pretty well. But they're pretty flexible. I've seen multiple different versions do well, but the one that's like usually like the simplest is just like the melee style, like Bloodthirster Sterix, if that makes sense. Galio. So Galio is basically like a giant tank. He just jumps in and does some damage. You're mostly playing him for the stun when you're unlocking him via Demacia. So it's not necessarily like, you know, you don't necessarily need to build him like a damage dealer. So a lot of times you're building him just for like, you know, as good of the tank items as you can make, right? Like, sorry, like, you know, armor, HP, magic resist works out pretty well. A lot of Galio's damage scaling is actually based on magic resist, so I would say stuff like Declaw can work really effective. Other cloak items can also work well on him, just to give him like that huge amount of magic damage if you actually want. But in general, you're playing him mostly for the stun, and you're playing him to be kind of like a nuisance drain tank kind of unit that you might as well just put all of your tank items and kind of treat him like a primary tank if you have him upgraded. Next we have Set. So Set is a magic fighter and also does a bunch of true damage, which is really nice. Because he's a magic fighter, you can treat him similar to like how a lot of other AP units we kind of talk about, where you go like, you know, Hand of Justice and a Jewel Gauntlet, right? Click Glove pairing and just make your ults crit and stuff. He does an insane amount of damage, and also when he grabs a target, he jumps and he drops them, it does a huge AoE to like everybody in the area, especially if you end up targeting a high HP unit, because it scales off of their max health of whoever he grabs in and throws in. In general, something like this works out well. You can also go for double Omnivamp on him or some sort of survivability, just because it helps him quite a bit. Note that things like Edge of Night sometimes could be a little bit awkward, because the boss, I think, procs like around the same time, and then it's like a timing thing of like which one procs, and it's like a little bit weird. But in general, you want him to activate the boss early in a fight. So a lot of times if you're playing him, you want to kind of like take the damage, activate the boss, heal back up, and then come in and just do an insane amount of damage, because he just like runs around and hits really hard with lots and lots of auto attacks. But in general, you can also scale him with AP, something like a Rabadon's. You can also put like more of like tankiness on him, things like Bloodthirster, and like not play as much into crit and play more into damage am. Both are really flexible, but in general, if you're playing him, think like you're playing like an AP melee style unit. Next we have Tahm Kench. Tahm Kench, Bilgewater, spending 500 Bilgewater Serpents is how you unlock him. So a lot of times you're playing him from a Bilgewater spot, obviously. That kind of unlocks the Bilgewater items, of which Pylo Citrus is really good on him. So Tahm Kench, a lot of times you're building him. He's a bruiser, so he scales off HP, obviously. And he does a good amount of magic damage. He does like a thing where he sucks in a unit and then he spits them out. So he has like this really obnoxious stun. Think of it similar like Braum in set 15 if you played. He's like kind of like that. But this Pylo Citrus is really, really great. Every 7 seconds, you heal 15% max HP, and then you gain the Serpents. It actually is like probably one of his best items, because like he lives long enough to proc it, and then he's just like obnoxious at how much healing he can do. You can also go for some of the other really powerful Bilgewater items that you unlock a little bit later. But in general, you're actually building Tahm Kench more like a tank. You could just scale up his damage by feeding him with Glutton. You feed him AP, and then you scale up the AP. But in general, the Tahm Kench is going to be so tanky and hard to deal with that a lot of times you're building him with those tank items. So that's like, you know, durability or HP. You know, I haven't been showing it, but you can easily put Anima Visage in place, but think HP, armor, MR, similar to all of the other ones. Next we have Thresh. Thresh is a magic fighter, so you want to treat him more like a melee AP style of unit. So once again, you can think of item pairings like Hodge, Jewel Gauntlet, which is really common. He's really flexible as well, because he's also Warden, and if you're playing deep into Warden, he can be extremely tanky. Just know that his passive is that he heals based on damage that he does, and you really want him to stay alive as long as possible. So building him more for AP damage is typically a good idea. So you don't necessarily want to build him like a tank, right? You don't want to necessarily say, okay, I'm going to build him like D-Claw because he's a frontline unit like this. You really want to build him more for like AP damage, right? So you're thinking more of like the Jewel Gauntlet crit, some damage am, something like this, right? I don't think that his healing from his passive is enough to keep him alive, so I would definitely go for like a Bloodthirster or a Hodge just to make sure. But either way, you want to build him for AP damage. I have like a meme build that I went one time that worked pretty well, but I would not recommend it, where I went like double Archangels, Edge of Night, right? Where I just scaled up the AP, and then like he didn't die because of Edge of Night, and then by the time they retargeted him, he was healing so much because of the double Archangels that he was just broken. This is something I tried, but you know, I would not try it. I'm just saying that because if somebody watches my VOD channel, you know, there was some crazy shit that I was doing in some of those games, which, you know, wasn't necessarily good. You know, I wouldn't do it in ranked, but I'm just saying, like, you know, it did work for me that one time, so I'll just shout it out here, but please don't do it. I'm sure it will grief you in your games. Anyways, we have Volibear. Volibear, Bruiser, Freljord. Obviously, you can unlock him just by playing around Bruisers. He has HP and AD scaling primarily. So when you look at Volibear, you're thinking, that's right, Sterix Gauge. Really, really good. Obviously, HP, AD item, huge health shield as well. It will work really well because Volibear will have a bunch of HP being a bruiser and having bruiser scaling. You can build him like a drain tank as well, like the Bloodthirster, and then give him some sort of damage amp and or crit, like whatever your last damage item is. I find that he doesn't attack fast enough to go for like a Guinsoo style of build or attack speed kind of build, but I also have seen that sometimes, but not sure how good it is. In general as well, Volibear, I think, is also going to be the cringe artifact holder. There are a lot of artifacts that scale well with HP and AD. For example, you have like all of the tank ones that are really good. Then there's also some of these new ones, like obviously Titanic Hydra. 3% of the holders max health plus their attack damage is bonus physical damage. This is like a broken Volibear item for sure. But then there's the cloak one. I don't know where it is. I can't find it. Cloak of... oh no, Hellfire Hatchet. This is what I was thinking of. Attacks deal 2% of your max health as bonus physical damage, and for every 1% missing health, gain 1% attack speed. I'm pretty sure this is just giga broken on Volibear. Even if you take out the fact that like Ornn usually has like late game scaling things, like artifacts are all going to look super inflated this set just because Ornn is a 5 cost that gives artifacts. So a lot of artifacts in the stats, if you look at them, they'll look like they're really broken. And why is that? Because it means that you have an Ornn and you're level 9 and you probably like lived many turns to get the artifacts in the first place, right? So artifacts are going to be a little bit inflated by that because it's going to have like that survivor bias stuff. But I'm telling you guys now, this is actually good on him. It's not like read the effect of this and then read Volibear's kit. It's like the item was made for him, right? So like there's gonna be some cringe stuff like that with Volibear, so just keep that in mind if you have any of the tank or HP ones. Those are probably gonna work really well on him. Next we have Mel. So Mel is an interesting unit. Mel right now is arguably one of the most broken of the unlocks, one of the strongest of all of the units in the game right now. She is very commonly played on a lot of boards. Obviously it's PvE, we'll see if she gets nerfed before live, but Mel is an insane magic caster. When you look at her kit, she has this insane mana threshold, 200. It's insane. It's going to take her forever to get that ult off. However, she also has a passive where she throws out these orbs and they steal mana. Like they steal mana from enemies, which is just so obnoxious. It's just like if you guys haven't played with mana reaving, like that was a thing that was really common in some of the earlier sets because you were able to craft mana reaving items. Like then there were support items that did it, but that was more situational. But in set 9, I remember it was something you always had to kind of consider and play around. But in set 9 you could also craft with a Zephyr, so you know that those were the days, right? That's when I started playing TFT. But anyways, draining of the mana, basically this allows you to generate some extra mana. So you might look at this and say to yourself, okay, I don't necessarily need mana because she generates mana on her own. And I would say no, the actual opposite is true. This unit does so much damage with an ult that you just want her to cast. If she gets an ult off, she just pops the she just like the whole board is gone. It's insane. She does this thing where like the two orbs rotate and then they follow a unit and then they collide and it literally hits like half the board. Like she is so broken. She is so strong. So what do you want to do with her? You actually build her similar to the other units, which is really common this set, I find, but it might just be a PvE bias because like it might just be like, you know, fights and like the way the fight RNG and things are working out with the boards that are really popular. You build her like double mana gen. Again, usually it's like, you know, Shojin, Blue Buff, double Shojin, like a double adaptive, Nashor's JG. The one that's really, really good on her in general is actually double adaptive helm and then some sort of item like a crit item like Jewel Gauntlet. It's not that consistent, but it does give her a lot of mana gen. Adaptive helm, I've been mentioning it a little bit in these 5 cost notes and like these different units and boards. Adaptive helm got buffed. It now gives 3 mana gen. 3 mana gen on Adaptive is pretty massive because it also gives the additional 15% mana from all sources. Now, the 15% mana, that's a little bit of a meme sometimes and not necessarily crazy strong, but in general, this gives attack damage ability power, 3 mana gen, and it gives you the extra mana from all sources. This also works with Mel's kit, her passive where she's stealing mana. The adaptives don't work really well with that. So I think the best performing or like some of the better performing options on Mel is playing an adaptive helm as one of your mana gen items, and playing multiple actually makes a lot of sense because she has the built-in mana gen where she's stealing 1 mana every second, then plus this, you're basically have like 7 mana every second, but then you're also getting 15% bonus on top of that. So it actually works out really well to like get her to her ult in a timely manner, if that makes sense. Also, it's not 1, it's 2, so it'd be like 8 8 plus the 15, and then I think it's 15 and 15, so it works out to like 10, which is like a radiant blue buff, and then she also gains a bunch of like ability power, and then you crit. But in general, the main takeaway is, if you can, double mana. If not, she's still broken enough that you can just build her like a normal caster, by the way. I'm just trying to tell you like what is the more common things that you're seeing if people are like angling towards it. But you can just build her like, you know, damage amp crit, you know, damage amp item, crit item, mana gen item. If you want some AP items as well, you can build like a Rabadon's or something. It's fine, but usually double mana is what you go on her now. Next we have Xerath. Xerath just drops nukes, insanely powerful. Of course, you just want to scale that really well. A lot of times you get Xerath, it doesn't really generate mana fast enough to like warrant having like multiple casts. So a lot of times if you're playing Xerath as a damage dealer, you're usually playing Xerath for like one cast, and you're kind of like a one and done and hope that you kill the board. So a lot of times what you end up doing is just building like a full crit damage amp build, similar to other casters like, you know, Shojin JG or Blue Buff JG, and then some rendition of Giant Slayer, or Striker's Flail, or base AP, like, you know, depending on what you need, depending on your augments, depending on your situation. Lastly, we have Ziggs. So Ziggs is an an AP caster, once again, similar to the other units that we already talked about, Shojin, JG, Guardbreaker, or Striker's Flail, or Giant Slayer, or Rabadon's. All of those are going to be fine. I don't think, even though Ziggs has a huge mana threshold, I don't usually see like double mana. A lot of times, like the thing that I see, because you want the crit consistency a lot of times, is something like this. Also, I should have mentioned this maybe before, even with Mel. This is a common build. When I talk about double mana, so I'll even show it with Annie and Mel. Right, like a lot of these units that I say double mana, I should have maybe mentioned this earlier. Sorry, I kind of glossed over it because it's still PBE and I don't want to give you guys, these are the best items. But this is another really common build that you'll see this set, right? Shojin, JG, Nashers, because the Nashers works as a mana gen item so long as you have crit consistency, and this gives you a little bit more crit consistency. And then Nashers being a bow item gives you attack speed, so it makes the Shojin a little bit more efficient. So with double mana gen, a lot of times you do this, and this is like, you know, mana gen in place of this item being a damage item. Right, so if you're going for double mana and you're trying to cast a little bit sooner, this is a way of doing double mana that you kind of split the difference, and you generate mana, but it still helps your damage a little bit. But it kind of is like, you know, you can do better in terms of mana gen, or you can do better in terms of damage. This is like crossing in between, but actually works really well on a lot of these units. So that's something to keep in mind for a lot of these units. A Nashers is a great way to make your crits more consistent, but also to generate double mana on these units that might like it, or have high mana thresholds where it matters a lot to get there. Lastly, let's talk about all of the 5 costs in the game. So I'm going to start with Rise and Silas, because these ones are the ones that you will likely unlock a little bit more often than the other ones. But let's start with Rise. So Rise right now is in a really bad spot. I don't want to I played a lot of Rise in PBE because I thought that like it would be an important skill set to capping out a lot of the boards, but it turns out this Rise unit is not very good right now. I'm hoping they'll be buffed when the set goes live, but we'll see. Currently right now, you really very rarely, like, I don't want to say rarely, but you don't necessarily want to play with the game plan of when I fast 9, I'm going to play Rise. This is a common trend with a lot of these 7 costs, by the way. They're not as broken as their cost makes them seem, because like they cost a lot, right? So when you think of a 7 cost, like, you know, I find that their power isn't like, you know, maybe with some of these ones it is, but like in general, like Rise, I wouldn't play him with the expectation that he's going to be 2 gold better than a 5 cost, right? Like he's like the separation between Rise and a 5 cost is not the same power spike that you get from like a 3 cost to a 5 cost, but it's like the same amount of gold difference, you know what I mean? But that's just the way it's balanced right now. We'll see how it comes out on live. In general with Rise, he actually just now, a lot of times on the boards that you play him, he works more like a utility bot, where you just make him cast and get like utility off, because with a lot of his bonuses, he hits like entire board because he has these like orbs that are splitting between different units. So when I say utility bot, a lot of times he's like a holder of your anti-heal and your shred sunder. And he's a really good job of doing that, by the way. Especially, like, you know, if you play him with, like, some Freljord boards play Rise still, because Freljord Rise applies the chill effect to the entire board, and the Freljord units scale off the chill effect. So I'm trying to highlight it, but if you can see it, the website's not letting me show you. But with Freljord Rise, he applies the chill, so he's really common on Freljord boards because he applies the chill, which optimizes your damage for everybody. But then you could also put all the utility on him, so just unlocking a single copy of a Rise basically gives you, like, an AoE, whole board hitting, chill and shred sunder and anti-heal unit, which is really powerful in that regard, right? Not to necessarily upgrade for a Rise 2 to be your damage dealer, but to play in that sense. That's something as like an AoE utility spreader. But if you're playing him, a lot of times, like, you know, double mana generation and has been working, but once again, this might be a PBE thing. A lot of units love double mana gen in PB. It might just be like the pacing of the fights in PB versus when things go on live. But this was a really common build when Rise was a little bit more broken earlier, because the reason you like the double mana is that a lot of times you're playing Rise with Shurima, and the Shurima Rise stuns. So when you play this pairing with Shurima Rise, and you stun the entire board, you just want this Rise to cast as many times as possible, because you just keep stunning the board and you basically just stun lock everybody and you just win the fight that way. But either way, you can also go for like a typical caster build if you want to. That can also work on the Rise. But typically right now, you usually play him with utility. That's like the main thing. Silas, a lot of times, is like a great option on board. Silas is really popular nowadays, but I don't think he's popular too much because of like him being a crazy unit that you play around for dealing damage. A lot of times in optimization, because currently playing around Arcanist and Defender is really strong. One of the most common units that you'll see on most final boards right now is Nico, which is basically just budget Silas, right? In terms of the synergies, right? The reason it's so good is because Defender right now is way overtuned, right? Like 2 Defender is extremely powerful. 12 armor to your whole team, and then the Defenders themselves gaining 30 armor and MR is just an absurd amount of power. So almost every board that you play is going to try and play around at least having 2 Defender active. It's just a really important synergy. It's a really powerful synergy. And if it doesn't get nerfed, it will be one of the cornerstones of whenever you're building your board on live server. 2 Defender is insane. Same thing applies with, oops, excuse me, sorry if there was static, I bumped my mic. Same thing applies with 2 Arcanist. 2 Arcanist gives your whole board ability power, and it's quite substantial, and the Arcanist gain a little bit more. A lot of times you'll see these units just easily slot in their board. They also fit in really nicely. A lot of times you'll see these 2 units being common, right? Because Piltover is also really strong. So most final boards will have Nico, Vi, and then a Piltover unit, and then like usually Swain, which is a juggernaut, like, and he's broken, he has Arcanist. Like, these are like the common units right now, but a lot of it's because they're really broken. Like, Vi's really strong, Nico's like decently strong, but has good synergies. So when you play Silas, you usually just play all the time in place of Nico, is what I'm trying to say. So a lot of times, like, you're not necessarily itemizing towards him, but you're playing him as a better Nico that has a stun and extra damage that does really well. If you are playing towards Silas as a primary carry, you're playing him like a melee style unit, right? AP style melee. Hodge dual gauntlet I think is essential. This unit needs some sort of mana gen, I find, or else he doesn't cycle through his ults fast enough. So I think Hand of Justice is really important compared to something like a Bloodthirster or other Omnivamp tools. With Silas as well, he really performs well if you play deep into Arcanist. I think that Silas does not do enough damage or does not behave well enough if you do not have like 4 or 6 Arcanist in. Because what ends up happening is, this is like a really important part of his kit. I don't know if they're going to change it or anything. This Chainbreaker, he has 3 abilities and he alternates between the 3 of them, and they're basically based on his unlock condition. One's based on Jarvan, one's based on Garen, one's based on Lux. The Lux one is the damage one, right? And for some reason there's this thing called Chainbreaker, and basically he can't cast the same ult twice in a row, and he'll use the one that is the quote-unquote most useful at the moment. Every time I play Silas, I swear to God, if he doesn't have enough Arcanist in, the other 2 of the abilities besides the Lux one do not do enough damage, because he'll just leap in, he'll just int himself, or he'll leap in and he'll do like some extra damage. But unless he does like the Lux one where he just like whips his chains and like kills the entire board, it is very hard to let him do damage. So if you're making him as a last item, like if you're looking at him for a last item, if you're playing him with Arcanist, you just want him to survive, so you can go double Omnivamp. So this is like a common recommendation. You know, he just heals everybody, he lives forever. If you're playing deep into Arcanist, the last item could be pretty much anything. You can even give him like CC immunity just to make sure that he doesn't get inted or stunned and die or anything like that. But if you're not playing him with vertical Arcanist, you probably need to give him some sort of AP related item. But even then, I think you're just shooting yourself in the foot, because you're putting AP on an Arcanist, which just feels really bad. So the last item here is often like, you know, either survivability if you're just going for stuns, or some kind of AP, or some kind of extra crit consistency. I feel like this would be my favorite build for him if I wasn't playing Arcanist, because like at least you get the mana gen so you can cycle through the abilities faster. But I just want to say, like, you know, of course, you can have Silas games where he pops off. You can have Silas games where he doesn't pop off. I would be careful because he is a huge investment, right? Selling the Jarvan, the Garens, and the Luxes is usually a difficult unlock condition, and he's a little bit hard to get out there. So if your game plan is to carry Silas and you're not playing 6 Arcanist, be very careful. If your game plan is to carry Silas, then I would definitely lean towards like those high cap Arcanist boards where you're playing Annie Silas dual carry. So that would be my takeaway with it. But I do want to say that that's based on my findings. I think Silas is in a good spot right now because of his traits. So I don't think he's gonna get adjusted or like he's not a unit that I think is gonna get buffed heavily in the upcoming, like, you know, when the set goes live. But I will say, like, be cautious because like you might unlock him, spend 21 gold on him, and then he just, like, you know, doesn't kill anything because he cycles through his bad ults, right? There's like a consistency there that makes it really awkward if he doesn't have a lot of AP. So that's what I mean. Just be careful, because I'm the reason I'm talking about it so much is because I mentioned this in some of my VODs in my other videos where I'm like, this unit does not do that much, and I'm just clarifying it for here to say like why I think that. But obviously, if you disagree with me, play him every single game. I don't care. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to help you guys out. Void, Baron Nashor. Baron Nashor, I also played as well. And I think this unit really needs certain items. You need to have an Omnivamp item on him. He's an attack fighter. He kind of like starts off like to the side and then he like runs in. He's immune to CC, so you don't have to build crowd control on him, which is great because he has that passive. However, you need some sort of Omnivamp. The main items I usually see successful on him are BT Sterix, because he's going to have an insane amount of HP. He's going to be hard to kill, and if you unlock him, he's usually going to have to like 1v9 or do a lot of damage. So the Sterix BT gives him the survivability as well as scales him really well on the AD, which is primarily an AD unit. Last item can be damage amp, or it can be like, you know, more crit consistency or a crit item. All of them are fine, but I would definitely lean towards having at minimum the Sterix and then some sort of Omnivamp, Sterix and an Omnivamp, because otherwise I find that the Baron could actually die really fast. And I know that sounds really whack, but for a unit that takes up 2 unit slots and requires level 10, this unit can die very fast. Like, so you really want to have like a Sterix or some sort of survivability, right? I would just caution you, because if you're angling towards and you're spending your whole game investing towards the unit, I don't want you guys to do like what I did, right? I played Baron, and my items, because I just didn't have good items, I thought that he would just be broken. I had like double Giant Slayer on him. I think my last item was like some attack speed or something. I didn't have an Omnivamp, and my unit, he just died instantly. Like, I was like, oh, I was like, oops, my bad. So make sure, like, I would say Sterix is one of the priorities for him, just to make sure that like he actually does everything. With Sterix versus without Sterix, that unit just like, he nukes the entire board with his Sterix. Next we have Aurelian Soul. So this unit is really hard to judge. So basically with Aurelian Soul, he basically gets these upgrades from casting, right? The more he casts, the more you kind of scale into late. This unit does pretty much dick all, does absolutely nothing unless you scale him. So a lot of the Targon related spots that you play Aurelian Soul from is usually from like either your fast level 7 or you're playing level 7 reroll, and you're getting this guy like early to mid stage 3. If you don't have Aurelian Soul in early or mid stage 3, the chances are he's going to be weaker than most other units on your board, and he's not going to be worth like the investment because he scales with the casts. So a lot of times when you play him, what you actually do is you go full chain cast build. So you go Shojin, Guinsoo, Shojin. Just double mana gen on attack, gain 5 mana, and you go for Guinsoo, and you just make him scale all the way up to the skies, right? Because basically, like, there's 2 different conditions. I want to try and highlight it for you guys, but it's a little bit hard because the website kind of, I can't get it. Try my best. All right, you know, I'll just explain it. So there's a threshold for the for his casting, right? He gets stronger with certain amounts of Stardust that he gains, and usually it's from playing a huge amount of Targons and having him upgraded. They nerfed it because he used to be broken, it used to be an instant win. Now he's in an okay spot. But the thing is, you have to hit him early, because basically you're going for the final cash out is just an instant win. The cash out right before that is also basically a win. So usually you're just going for that one. You're not necessarily going to make it to the final one where you win for free. You're going to make it to the second last one, which is around 700 if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if they got buffed or nerfed since the last time I played it, but it's around 700. That is doable if you hit Aurelian Soul and you build them with double generation like this, like Guinsoo, Shojin, Shojin. Of course, at any point you can drop the mana generation and just build him towards like doing damage, and that's like kind of like the cop out. I would say if you make it to the second last one, which I think is 480, you can build him for damage and he'll actually do damage and be a really reliable carry. If you want to actually like win the game, then you want to have double mana gen until the second last one, and if you are in a spot where you can actually win the game, that you think like, oh, I hit him on like beginning of stage 3, then you could potentially go for the last one, which is more of like an Easter egg thing. That's gonna be like your sometimes food. So a lot of times you're basically deciding, I'm gonna put mana gen on this guy, and then when you decide to switch off of that and go for like a typical caster build, just so that he does like a lot of damage, right? That's like the trade-off. So you're basically deciding, when am I going to do one versus the other, and whenever you make that call, that's when you switch your items. It usually can be like when you're 1 or 2 lives left, that you're basically close to death. You can switch him to do more damage, because obviously he will do a lot of damage. The double casting doesn't matter as much. It's just to ramp up that Stardust to gain those extra abilities, because he upgrades his ult with as many casts as he does basically. Next we have Brock. Brock, you actually can build like a giant AD monster. So a lot of times it's like Bloodthirster, Sterex. Like these are like the drain tank melee style build, and CC immunity. He scales really well off HP and AD. So once again, HP AD type of builds. But you can also build them with any AD items or any AD melee style items. So you can build them like Hodge, IE, but a lot of times the survivability with something like Sterex BT, one of those items or both of them is going to work really well, and then CC immunity and extra stats. And then similarly, Zehen has like this really crazy effects where he basically can revive himself if he casts a bunch and does a bunch of damage. A lot of times, you know, you can go for Bloodthirster, Sterex, Titans, similar to other AD frontline units, but you can also, if you have the opportunity to, go for like more crit, right? I think something like this is maybe really good on him, just because getting the cast off and doing a lot of damage is really powerful, and Darken, it gives you some omnibus, you have some survivability, so going for a little bit more damage this way, even like instead of this for CC immunity, like a QSS can also work. The problem is right now there's very few games with Zehen, just because he has such a specific unlock. You have to 3-star Xin Zhao, and then the Xin Zhao hero augment, and 3-starring Xin Zhao is its own like it's not that good, right? It's a little bit weaker than some of the other augments and some of the other reroll options in the game. So it's just a really awkward situation, because a lot of times by the time you get Zehen, you're already almost dead, and then you don't even have enough gold to like level up to actually upgrade him to 2-star and stuff like that. So it's a little bit awkward. So this one's really hard for me to judge exactly which is the strongest. Right now, the drain tanky builds look the best, but that's just because you're trying to like make boss unit unkillable so that he just goes infinite and lives forever, which is a valid option, but I just don't know if like more upfront damage and casting will work out to be better when he actually makes it to live. But anyways, those are all of the 5 costs and the expensive units in the game, as well as the unlocks. Like I said, a lot of these builds, this is just to like be like a little bit of a bridge of telling you guys, hey, these are the units, these are like some of the ideas of what they want, so you have a little bit of a game plan, so you're not like fish out of water, unlocking a unit, reading their ability, trying to figure out what they do and how they function and stuff. A lot of them are just common ideas that are basically persist throughout all of TFT and all of the TFT sets. Specific optimizations are going to come with more popular units. For example, I was talking a little bit more about Mel and Annie, because these are units that have a lot more variations to them, because obviously they've been really strong, especially Mel. So like there's lots and lots of data and lots of people trying different builds and mathing it out. So like stuff like double mana on Mel is starting to look like really good and stuff like that. But of course, it's still PBE. Everything's subject to change. When the set goes live, don't worry, I will give you guys updated versions of these guides. I will do specific guides on units, specific guides on comps, so stay tuned. Like I said, early days, and just more to like bridge us into the set, so when the set launches, we're not completely lost in what's going on. Additionally, before I let you guys go for today, I now have holiday bundles. They are featured at the bottom of the video from my store. So you get a Christmas card or a holiday card and a Poro keychain. So if you're interested in that, they're available for purchase now from my shop. They have free shipping, so you know, it should be all good for everybody. Of course, I also mentioned this is something that I'll announce properly starting tomorrow, or as soon as like I fix stuff up on YouTube's end. But I will be giving away these bundles with people who sign up for coaching for set 16. So I will make a more detailed explanation about that. So if you're interested in signing up for coaching, this will be a free gift that you will get with the coaching. So just make sure to stay tuned, and you can maybe wait if you want to, if you're thinking about doing that this set. As a fun way to kind of bridge my art communities, because I've been doing a lot of art, especially at the end of set 15, and bridging that with some of the TFT folk on this channel. But anyways, thanks for watching, have a great day, and see you. Bye bye.